Welcome everyone. For me in Cincinnati, Ohio, it is 8:30 a.m. in the morning on Wednesday. So good morning and good evening for all of you who are not in my time zone. I'm actually, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and that is assessment. And this case, the required talk is designing formative and summative assessments for trainees. So my objectives are that when we're done, you'll be able to list 5 important principles of assessment that you should consider when you're assessing your students. You'll be able to define formative versus summative assessment or feedback, and then give some characteristics of effective feedback. John Cowan said quite some time ago that assessment is the engine which drives student learning. If students know they're going to be assessed, they will learn better because of that assessment. Also, some years ago, Williams wrote a manuscript called The 10 Rules of Assessment. I've shortened that down and taken some liberty with it to 5 rules that I think are the most important rules for brevity and simplicity. And the 5 rules that I'm going to briefly describe are: test knowledge application, not just the facts; beware of situation and case specificity; you have to use multiple tools multiple times and have multiple observers; try to teach and assess at the same time; and give feedback. So let's just look quickly at each of these principles. Number 1, testing application of knowledge rather than simple facts. So I was told once that in any education talk, you have to have at least 1 or 2 pyramids. Here's one pyramid, this pyramid of competency. So we talk about the bottom of the pyramid, the ability of the student to know how to do something. Moving up the pyramid, they should be able to tell how. And then up further, the show how, and then finally the do. This is what we want our students to do. We want to know the student is competent to do whatever it is we're asking them to do, whether that's checking intraocular pressure or taking a history. We need to have ways to assess their ability to do all of these things. And that doesn't mean you only have things to assess the do part. You need assessments, though, that can assess the different levels on this pyramid. And so when we think about this pyramid in healthcare professions, the knows at the bottom, the knows how, the shows how, and the does, we have different ways to assess things. So at the bottom of the pyramid, the memorization of facts, multiple choice questions, essay exams, maybe oral exams would be a way to assess this. But as we move up the pyramid and we're looking at ability to do things, again, I'm going to use an example of checking intraocular pressure, for instance. There might be a checklist, and I'll define checklist in a moment. And then at the very top of the pyramid, there's something called rubrics, and I will define rubrics, but Dr. Mayorga is going to be talking in detail about rubrics and why, what they are and why they are important. So here's an example from my home institution, the Cincinnati Eye Institute, of a checklist. And you can see that this checklist, entitled Technician Skill Evaluation, I'm just going to look at the first line here, but under tonometry, accurately obtains intraocular pressure readings within 2 points of the doctor or assigned evaluator, and simply yes or no. And then there's a place for initials of who's observing this, so the assessor, but it's a checklist is either a yes or a no, and we'll show that in contradistinction to a rubric. So checklists can be used to assess technical skills. Now, rubric, one definition is it's an explicit set of criteria used for assessing a particular skill. And I'll give you an example in a moment if that doesn't make sense, but it consists of 3 parts, or should. Dimensions, which could be the steps of a procedure. Levels, so how good are they? Are they a 1 to a 4, a novice to an expert? And then descriptors, and this is very important because a lot of rubrics don't have descriptors that help make the rubric more reliable. And that's, what do you expect to see at each of these levels from 1 to 4? So let's look at a rubric. So here's an example of pupil examination. You want to assess the student's ability to do a pupil exam. Well, what are the components of that? Well, they should check the size of the pupils, ask for distant fixation, look at the direct pupil response, etc. So on the left side of the rubric, there are the different steps of the skill. At the top, there's going to be some sort of a scale. We've chosen for many of the rubrics we published to use this scale, a modified Dreyfus scale: novice, beginner, advanced beginner, and competent. And then importantly, you want to fill in these blocks. If you just have blank spaces here and you ask the assessor, just check what you think. Do you think they're a beginner at checking the pupil size? That's open to very much interpretation by the teacher, by the assessor. It makes it much more subjective. Whereas if you have these boxes filled in, as these are here, it makes it hopefully more objective. And what the assessor simply does is circle what they see when they're watching the student check the pupil size. That's a rubric, and I'm not going to talk about that anymore, I don't think, because Eduardo is going to be covering this in detail. So the second principle is that human performance is highly situation and case specific. What that means is that just because a student may be very smart and do very well on a test, a multiple choice question test, for instance, that doesn't necessarily mean they can talk to a patient or they can do a procedure. And so there's something called the halo effect, which is where a student's very smart, they do great on their exams, but they can't do the other things they need to do. But you assume because they're so smart, they must be great at everything. The opposite of that is the pitchfork effect, where the student does poorly, say, on some assessment, and then you assume they're not very good doing other things. So we want to avoid halo and pitchfork effects. And it's interesting that, when pilots are licensed to fly planes, they don't just get a license to fly anything, they get a license to fly specific planes, a 727 or a 747. They're not just given a license to fly any plane they want, because the tasks flying these different planes are different. Because of this second principle, the third principle is that we must therefore use multiple tools multiple times, because no single assessment measures all your objectives. So you must have many. And no single score is going to predict performance of a student who's required to do multiple different things and know multiple facts about things. And this brings up the concept of validity and reliability. And to make it very simple, validity simply means that you're picking the right assessment tool for the job. In other words, is this assessment really measuring what we want to measure? So if we're talking about checking intraocular pressure by applanation, are we going to use a multiple choice question test, or perhaps a rubric or a checklist? And the answer, of course, is you're not going to assess this skill with a multiple choice question test. It's not a valid way to know that a student can accurately check intraocular pressures. And the concept of reliability is fairly simple. And basically the way I look at this is that if you have a way to assess a student, and let's say you videotape the tonometry or the pupil examination, and you ask 5 different teachers or assessors to grade this, and they grade it 5 different ways, that is not a reliable way, because it's the same, the student has done the same thing, it's a videotape. But if people are not giving the same scores or grades to the same videotaped procedure or skill, then that's not reliable. You want the assessment tool to be reliable and for assessors to grade it more or less the same when they're looking at the same skill demonstration. And that's why rubrics like this one can be very helpful. Theoretically, this should make the assessment much more reliable, because the assessor has it written down in front of them. What does it mean to be competent at asking for distance fixation, or looking at grading the indirect pupil response? The fourth principle is If possible, try to make every assessment a learning experience. Now, this is not always possible if there's a final examination, but the idea is to teach and assess simultaneously. So this brings up formative assessments, which are crucial. And there's a difference between formative and summative. So summative assessments are, have they met the final goal? This would be the final exam at the end of the session, at the end of the semester, or the end of the training course. Formative is really behavior modification. It's hopefully information you're giving back to the students through assessment to improve their performance. Another word for behavior modification is teaching. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to change behaviors that we think are not good, but also reinforce behaviors that we think aren't good. So here's another way to think about this, just to try to make it more explicit. What's the difference between formative and summative assessments? It really is only in how the assessment tool is used. So if you look at this graph or this schematic, we have our training course, which is depicted over time by the maroon arrow. So you might use multiple choice questions and rubrics during the course. And if you use them here and give feedback towards the beginning, that's formative. You use them in the middle. Same multiple choice questions, same rubrics. You give feedback to the student. That's formative. And then towards the end, again, the same thing, formative. But at the end of training, at the end of the course, if you use the same multiple choice question test and the same rubrics, now it is summative. Have they passed or failed? And then the fifth principle is to provide high quality feedback. Feedback that is situation specific, descriptive, and constructive. And so there's some characteristics of good feedback. It should be frequent and it should be timely. If your dog, as pictured here, pees on your rug, you don't hit the dog a week later and say, bad dog. You do it right then, or the dog won't know what you're talking about. So you want it to be frequent and timely. Timely means near the time you observe the behavior. That's when the students will best change or reinforce their behavior, depending on whether it was good or bad. It should be expected and regular. And again, it's not just when someone's not doing something well, it's when you're trying to reinforce good behavior as well. And ideally, it's based on firsthand data. It's things that you're observing, not secondhand data from other people. And it's designed to improve performance. That's what formative feedback is for, versus that final assessment, the summative feedback. So constructive feedback should focus on behavior, not the person or personality. Here's the SMART acronym: specific comments and small amounts, measurable outcomes, accountability of the learner, which means if the learner doesn't think they need to improve, they're not going to improve. They need to be realistic recommendations, something that can be achieved, and timely, which I've already mentioned. So some characteristics of bad and good constructive feedback. Too general, you're not doing it right, versus you could improve your technique by, so this allows them to improve. You're not doing it right. What am I not doing right? How am I supposed to get better? So be specific. Judgmental, your history was terrible, versus your history was too long and not focused on the chief complaint. That's how I make myself better. That's how I take a better history. Your history was terrible. I don't know what that means. What am I supposed to do to improve? And then personal, you're just not reliable, versus yesterday you forgot to finish the patient's chart. Okay, I can fix these things on the right. I don't know exactly what to do on the left. And failing to give feedback leads to problems because it can lead to mixed messages. Students sometimes assume they're doing great, sometimes they assume they're doing bad, and they don't know if you don't tell them. So that can lead to false interpretation of their own abilities, and then ultimately, even lack of trust in the teacher. So the 5 rules, the summary. We want to test knowledge application, not the facts. It's important to check both, but we need to have assessment methods that span that pyramid that we talked about. We want to beware of situation and case specificity, which means we need multiple tools and multiple times and multiple observers. ideally, we'd like to teach and assess at the same time. And I think that I didn't mention, but the rubrics that we use, we give those to the students at the beginning of the course or the beginning of their training and say, here, do this. Look at that column that says competent. Do that. Don't keep it a secret. And finally, giving that feedback. The summative is important. Everyone's going to have summative feedback. But I would argue that the formative feedback is what's really important as you're trying to improve the students' abilities. So how will you assess your students? And I know you're doing it different ways right now. So I thank you for your time and attention.